I find it actually more and more difficult these days to go into a game blind, like completely blind, without knowing just about anything at all whatsoever about it. And that's, because of things like pre-release trailers and launch trailers and game coverage and, forums that we all like to visit and all sorts of things like that. And of course, the Steam list. And that's not a complaint, of course, it's just an observation that oftentimes, unless you're talking about really, really tiny, small little indies that you had never heard of before you just sort of stumbled upon them, it's actually really difficult to simply just be presented with a game that you previously had no clue about and actually know nothing about. But that's actually what happened to me with this game. This is ShockRods, a game by the pretty well-tested devs over at Stainless Games, actually, and presented, or published rather, by Green Man Publishing, which I had no idea Green Man Gaming had actually sort of got into the whole publishing thing. I think this may be the first time they've ever actually used that label for publishing a game. I think this may be their first. I thought that was really, really cool because I really like Green Man Gaming. It's a nice middle ground between horrible gray market key sites and sellers like CD Keys and G2A that I would never, ever recommend anyone use, and Steam and other just very direct outlets like that. It's a really good way to get legitimate games, sometimes a bit cheaper, but that are still straight from the straight from the source, and there's no gray market weirdness involved. I'm not sponsored by these guys, of course, or anything. I just like their service, and I've used it for a while. So I thought it was cool that I actually saw their name on a publishing deal and thought that it would be something to take a look at. So when I was sent a key for this, I had to go into it, but of course, I knew nothing about it at all. I had no idea what it even was, so I was like, well, you know what, I'm not even going to research it. I'm just going to go into it as I am and see what happens, because, like I said, I don't get the opportunity to do that very often. I was expecting, maybe is this going to be like a sort of like battle royale with vehicles? Is that what it is? Is this going to be like a kind of cross-out-like game or something? Instead, I had a couple of ideas in my head, but what I actually got when I got into it was basically Quake or Unreal with vehicles, and that is not something I'm going to complain about at all. This is actually an arena shooter in the very old style of the term. And instead of playing as humanoid characters, you are cars. The cars are highly customizable. There are lots and lots of aesthetic customization options. Of course, none of these actually change the performance of the vehicle right now, and I kind of doubt they actually will, because that seems to be kind of against what they're going for. You should be able to look however you want without worrying about the performance of the vehicle, which I like. And this is actually going to be in early access. It's not actually playable yet, but it's going to be in early access May the 30th. And we'll go into why I think that's actually really important a little bit later. But it had a beta weekend, essentially, is what this was. So I decided to, film it while I was also making the Fell Seal video, and then I would just put some footage together and talk about my experience. So it's actually kind of refreshing to be playing a very old-style arena shooter again, because I very rarely get to actually, play those all that often. And when I do, it's usually an older one, like my old standby Unreal Tournament 2004, that I should probably make a video on the sort of modding scene of or something at some point, because that game is fantastic. But new arena shooters are often things that crop up and then disappear quite quickly. And then there's the unfortunate case of the newest Unreal Tournament, which we won't talk about right now because it makes me sad. But basically, being able to play a new, actual, legit arena shooter with the same, a similar feeling to a lot of the old ones, but that's actually using some other different ideas, was something that I really unexpectedly enjoyed quite a bit, because I love me some arena shooters and I wasn't expecting to get one here. Now, in terms of its arena shooterness, it's actually very classic. So you have, besides the fact that you're, using vehicles instead of people, but you have the array of weaponry that you would traditionally expect from one of them. Things like, the railgun that's in the background right now, a minigun, a sort of flat cannon-like shotgun that bounces around, which is probably my favorite because I love the flat cannon from Unreal, and a cannon that just fires explosive rounds that have a very fast travel time, things like that. But you also have some interesting kind of one-off special weapons. These are weapons that you just pick up in a specific location on the map, and that you get one use of them. They don't have ammunition or anything like that. And these can be things like these big barriers, these big steel walls that say no on them, which I like, that you actually just deploy in front of you. And this is mostly used in things like the Capture the Flag game mode to actually stop someone from pursuing you if you have the flag, for instance. That's a good use of them. Or, of course, just by helping guard the person with the flag by dropping it right behind them and stopping their pursuers. You also have some other really cool ones, like this big ice cube that's actually a sort of a freeze ray. It's more like a freeze missile, really, in terms of how it fires, and can indeed freeze a bunch of opponents. And this other one that I really like that's basically a deployable Tesla coil. You just grab very much what looks like a Tesla coil or like a Van de Graaff generator and toss it down. And it actually has a big sort of lightning orb around it that it generates and does constant damage to everything that gets in it. Those are very fun weapons to use, and you also have other somewhat classic power-ups, like of course you have your health and armor littered around the place to find, and very large health and armor power-ups at very specific points on the map that you should learn where they are and, you know, like how long it takes for them to respawn. And some other stuff, like a big bouncing, like 10-ton weight thing. And, of course, your standby quad damage, naturally. And this is all very important as well in combination with the movement. And the movement is actually pretty interesting in this game because, obviously, first of all, you're in vehicles, so it feels a bit different than movement with humanoid characters and a lot of other arena shooters. It's actually a bit more like Tribes, honestly, in the way that the movement feels, because you're often sort of skating around the place on things that have a lot of momentum and can sort of carry in multiple directions when you're facing an entirely different direction and still fire and things like that. So if you're familiar with the Tribes games, rest in peace, then the movement system is similar. It's recognizable, at least. And one of the probably the coolest parts about the way the movement works is that your vehicles actually have jets on them that point in every direction. So you have a jet-powered jump as well as a double jump, so everyone can double jump, which is great. And you also have these jets on the wheels that allow you to strafe, and you can actually jet strafe in any direction that you want to on the ground or in midair, and even while facing another direction. So you could be turned backwards while like holding back and sort of reversing at full speed and trying to shoot someone behind you, and then they fire like a grenade at you and you can strafe directly to the right to avoid it, all while moving backwards and shooting backwards at the same time. It's pretty cool. It takes a little bit, of course, to wrap your head around if you haven't played a very movement-focused shooter like this in a while, but it's very intuitive and it works very well. And it's also very important for navigating the maps, because the maps so far, although there are only a few in the game at the current time, it's obviously not near the number that will be in it at release, they are very movement-focused. There are lots of power-ups and lots of weapons and things that you have to understand where they are and how to get to them, especially some of the one-off weapons like the freeze sort of freeze missile and the Tesla coil dealy-mabob jigger, and you need to be able to see these power-ups and actually understand how to get up or over to them with sometimes a precise series of jumps or strafes and boosts, which is very natural for an arena shooter. That's how they tend to work, you know? You have all these various platforms and little bits here and there, and there's a lot of verticality. There's a huge focus on verticality in this game that allows you to basically obtain specific weapons if you wish, and then use those on certain bits of the level to actually become like a sentry if you want to, especially in things like this map right here, the largest map, obviously, because it's the Capture the Flag map that's available for the beta, or was available, I should say. And like I said, it's very, very focused on verticality. You'll see as I go up here through this path, there's a lot of little bits of rock up sort of to the left and right of me, and those all have different power-ups on them, and they can be gotten to through various means, through like precise boosts and the like. So being able to navigate all of the environment and not just stay on the ground at all times is exactly, in my opinion, how an arena shooter should be, in that you have to sort of master the movement system to actually utilize it well enough to be able to get around in these places and actually find the best flag routes and the best ambush routes and all sorts of things depending on your favorite weapons and your playstyle. And it's, of course, very, very nice to see that they already have that battered down. They understand what it takes to make a good arena shooter map. That's important. Now, as I mentioned, there's also some visual customization for the cars that you can use. Everything from the color of the body, which is actually split into multiple colors if you want it to be, which is nice. The body style itself, the wheel styles, the colors of the wheels, the trails you leave behind, and even things like the thruster particle effects and things are all something that you can customize and color and change for yourself, which is really, really cool, and probably one of those things that will help people want to stay in the game a bit longer because they have something that is different from other people's. Now, that brings me to the whole early access thing. So, the sort of the unfortunate reality of arena shooters is that a lot of people will tell you that they want them, but fewer people will actually play them when they come out. We've seen it many, many times before with people saying that they love arena shooters and they want a return to the old days of when they were very popular, but then when a company actually makes one, not enough people actually play it to keep it alive, which is extremely unfortunate. However, I don't think that this game is being sent out to die or anything like that. In fact, I think that this is probably one of the better times to try and release something like this, especially in early access, because the current sort of state of the games industry is such that a lot of other old school genres are actually being fairly successfully revived, especially going through early access, and because that allows a lot of customer input and the like, basically, is the sort of focus there. And also, we have a lot of free-to-play games that have similar ideas to things like this now, and you know, these ideas that were kind of dormant for a long time, and like I mentioned, games like Crossout and several others have done the whole vehicular combat revival, and of course some of the most popular free-to-play games that are currently available, like War Thunder, also fit into that niche, just in a bit of a different way, but you know, they're very much still there. So a game that actually wants to do this, I think, is actually in a better position than they have been for probably the last 6 or 7, maybe longer years, to actually release something like this and have it have a player base. Because we're even looking at other arena shooters now, things like Quake Champions, that are not dead. I mean, they have a small player base, yes, I will admit that, but they have a small but consistent player base where, you know, people still regularly play it. That's an important difference than it just being small, because that might imply that it's dwindling and about to die, but it's really not necessarily. So I think with the combination of all these conditions together, we're actually in a place where perhaps something like this can actually come out and do well. And although I'm not sure of that, I would like to see it happen, because it's really good for everyone. Even if you don't particularly like the individual game, or you just don't like the genre altogether, it's important to actually have genre variety and just a lot of different ideas coming together from different developers, and instead of everyone trying to jump on the latest trends constantly. So the more that people like show that they're willing to try new things and play other games, the more that things like this will continue to happen. So basically we're in a spot where I would like to see something like this do well, which is probably why I actually wanted to show off the beta footage that I got, because it's actually a very competent arena shooter, and that's a classic genre that I have a ton of love for. So if there's going to be another one in a sort of more advanced version of our current gaming scene, with people maybe willing to hopefully play it, then I want to shine a light on it. So that is ShockRods. They have said that they expect the early access to last about a year-ish, and you know, that's a fair amount of time, I think, for something like this. So that means they're probably planning on adding a lot of content to it. And they've also said that they really plan on taking community feedback very seriously. And I think that's probably kind of the most important aspect of all this to remember when it comes to making an arena shooter that very much will actually last, hopefully, on the market, is early access allows a lot of community feedback. And if they do gather an audience for the game, then that will be extremely important, because that will help them actually figure out the little tiny specifics, you know, the little bitty bits that people actually expect to actually hopefully make a game like this last. And that's something that a lot of arena shooters that have just sort of fallen by the wayside in the past have actually lacked, although not for any fault of their own, just because they came out an already finished product. And that is something that you could say is actually potentially advantageous with this coming out in early access instead. All the little tiny things that maybe would bother people or people would expect can actually get hammered in, hopefully, in that year time, roughly a year time. So we'll see how it all works out. It's going to launch, like I said, at the end of this month, about May 30th, into early access, and it's going to launch, they've said, with about, 4 maps? Yeah, 4 maps, and just the normal amount of cars and customization and things that the beta had, which was a fair amount, honestly. And also the main modes, you know, the deathmatch, capture the flag, the ball game mode, which is actually pretty fun. So it should be a fairly varied package for people to try out and then build from there. And hopefully lots of community feedback and things actually helps them decide what to include, and actually guides the game to be perhaps a moderately successful arena shooter, which I think is one thing that our current market could really use, because those were great. And it's a fragile genre right now that is trying to bloom, but is finding it difficult here and there. So we'll see what happens. That is ShockRods. Look for it at the end of this month. I'll link you to the Steam page if you want to know more in the description below this video, of course. Thank you guys very, very much for watching. If you want to know more, feel free to ask. I'll try and answer any questions that I can. and the beta was actually not a bad experience. So there we go, we'll see what happens. I'll see you guys next time.